Welcome to Draconian, your podcast for news and updates in Hong Kong and Taiwan. I'm your host, William.
Hi everyone, welcome to the episode 20 of the Draconian podcast. This is your host, William. This week's episode will be about how national security have shaped this week's events in Hong Kong and Taiwan. From a weekly updates to the national security law, to Taiwan trying to protect its island from external influence, this week's political and social developments are not only worrying in nature, but also demonstrated how fragile the region has become. A quick podcast update. The review on top stories in Hong Kong and Taiwan of 2023's second half of the year will not be in this episode. However, there will be a separate standalone episode dedicated for this review, with a target date to be released near Christmas. Furthermore, if you would like to learn more about what's happening in Hong Kong and Taiwan, please subscribe to our podcast. Whether you are listening from your favorite podcast app or directly from YouTube or YouTube Music, feel free to subscribe and learn more about developments in Hong Kong and Taiwan. So now, let's get to Hong Kong first. As explained this week will be a review on basically all of the national security updates in Hong Kong. So now, this is the first topic or first piece of news, I would say. The National Security Police has furthered their actions last week in an attempt to silence any opposition voices, or in a further attempt to do so, while calling such voices both unpatriotic and betraying Hong Kong and China, while technically they are basically listing people or listing US citizens as wanted. In the update last week, the National Security Police has announced an additional 4 people being wanted for their actions of promoting Hong Kong independence and or requesting foreign governments and entities and sanctioning the Hong Kong and the Chinese government for any actions related to the national security law. Furthermore, authorities in Hong Kong has also further arrested 2 citizens who have subscribed to Nathan Law's Patreon, where Nathan is another person who is being listed as wanted, by stating such acts not only supports criminals but also unpatriotic in nature. This actually creates a precedent where the government would be able to arrest people based on what they have done, subscribing to Patreon or other crowdfunding platforms. Ronnie Tong, once a Democrat-turned-government supporter and a member of the Executive Council, have further warned citizens for not supporting fugitives through any means, and even compared monthly subscription fees of internet streaming platforms such as Netflix and Disney Plus to annual subscription fees for Nathan, which basically he is stating that you are supporting them or you are supporting the platform for $70-80 for those streaming services, but why you are supporting Nathan for $780 to $800 in that case. Furthermore, another person who is being listed, this time by the ICAC, Sai Chak Wong, had also warned his listeners of not so-called supporting his channel by posting stickers, as quoted, this may lead to an increased risk of you being able to be prosecuted by Hong Kong authorities, with basically the same reason. This is actually quite unprecedented, as basically the transaction took place, although the initial transaction took place in Hong Kong with a US entity, the real transaction actually between the US entity, in here Patron or Pioneer, with those who got wanted, for example, Nathan Law, actually took place outside of Hong Kong. So in this case, it seems that they have considered national security as the utmost important issue in Hong Kong, even years after they have effectively clamped the protests by introducing new laws that were never being consulted by the general public. Next is about an update on the Civil Servants Code of Conduct, which has redefined political neutrality. The term previously meant that the government or servants of the government or civil servants should serve all citizens impartially. However, in the current case, or in the update to the civil servant or proposed update, the term now actually have few, if not no resemblance to what citizens in Hong Kong are used to, where impartiality should be the key when accessing government services. The new definition of the term seems to resemble a more communist idea or a communist explanation of the term, where political neutrality should also mean an unconditional support by civil servants to any government policies, for example, national security policies, and they should not or they should never criticize the government using their identity as a civil servant. In fact, for the civil servants authority, the head of the civil servants bureau actually stated that this would be basically similar to what private companies would be able to do, where staff should not be able to criticize the companies. However, the Hong Kong government is technically a public body which should be able to be criticized by anyone, while at the same time, even private bodies have means to report issues anonymously. However, in this case, seems that reporting issues or objecting to government policies may, for example, get you arrested, or in worst cases, even get you on jail or force you to lose your job and etc. As it requested them to provide unconditional support to the government's policies, this actually technically means that the idea of political neutrality has technically been commied or basically has gone or undergone a communist transformation, which basically is done for not only political stability but also for national security, as basically or the security of the government and the state, which by extension, which means that the Hong Kong government will be able to technically criticize or to control what the social media of civil servants are doing. In fact, some civil servants have actively closed their social media accounts just only because of the introduction of this single amendment. There are also other amendments which are mostly a persuasion of or an amendment of this this guideline or the code of conduct to be more patriotic and supportive of the Chinese government or the Hong Kong government. So next, this will be actually a 3 to 4 different pieces of news, which actually create a combined image of how the national security has actually technically developed in the past week. So first, TVB continued its airing of TV confession for those who got convicted and currently serving in jail sentences under both the national security law and riots which were connected to the 2019 protest. At the same time, Radio Free Asia reviewed some of the contents of the national security education that took place amongst civil servants last month, which actually contained segments which were actually aired by the TVB last week or in the weeks prior. Furthermore, the OFCA, Office of the Communications Authority, have amended guidelines and complete all of its technical or its legal repercussions or its legal steps and basically be enforced immediately to implement national security law terms and provide exemptions for TV and radio stations to be neutral when airing patriotic programs. For example, airing national security programs and or programs which promote patriotism, for example, by showing how the government is working so well. So first is about the all the TV confessions. So the TVB aired 2-minute clips various 2-minute clips produced by the Hong Kong police force in an attempt to not only portray the events happened in 2019 as illegitimate events that were under influence of external forces, but also a direct TV confession by two of the most prominent convicts of rioting and national security law, Tommy Tong and Tang Chi-kin. At the same time, these clips were also featured in a video that ran for approximately an hour, which guaranteed listeners and viewers the truth of the 2019 Black Cat riots, which were only aired within the civil servants. In this video, or in the audio obtained by the Radio Free Asia, it contained basically unbacked accusations that such protests were the direct result of Jimmy Lai and the USA, or in support of the USA, and its cronies, and that foreigners were actively intertwined with the protests. Furthermore, it also seems to have included scenes from the TVB TV confession, which basically produced in conjunction by the Hong Kong police force. Furthermore, Office of the Communications Authority have amended guidelines to enable and request TV and radio stations to air patriotic programs without the need of being neutral or provide any opposite opinion. This amendment is to implement the national security law's provision on implementing patriotic education across all media. The same amendment actually at the same time lifted all restrictions when radio and TV shows are streaming or live streaming programs that are currently streamed on reputable radio and TV stations from mainland China or in the PR China. These showed how the national security law are affecting the audio and the radio and TV industry, where in terms or in the wise man's words, basically those who control the current controls the history. Those who controls history controls the future, which basically summarizes what the Hong Kong government would like to do. To try and portray the 2019 Hong Kong protests as a protest that were funded by foreign agents that were critical of China. Lastly, this is an update on how the Hong Kong Hong Kong Museum of History, the Hong Kong Science Museum, and Hong Kong Cultural Museum are being replaced or being basically reshuffled. The Hong Kong government announced plans to basically shuffle different museums, which affected the Hong Kong Science Museum, the Hong Kong Heritage Museum, and the setup of an additional or technical museum or different exhibition of basically what achievements of China. The Hong Kong government announced plans last week to move the Hong Kong Science Museum from its current location in the Science Museum Drive in East Tsim Sha Tsui to Sha Tin, where the current Hong Kong Heritage Museum to be, while at the same time disbanding the Hong Kong Heritage Museum. And in the current site of the Hong Kong Science Museum, the Hong Kong government basically introduced plans to implement an exhibition or basically a specified exhibition space for all the achievements of China after 1949. This is basically a part of the government's plan to instill patriotism in Hong Kong's secondary and primary school kids, while at the same time technically trying to remove the idea of Hong Kong's heritage as an independent or having an independent culture from mainland China. This actually seems a little bit interesting, as basically, according to statistics, the Hong Kong Heritage Museum and the Hong Kong Science Museum, which both were affected, actually have two of the highest amount of visitors drawn into those spaces or exhibition spaces within the Hong Kong's government-run cultural institutions. This showed how basically some legislative councillors said that this is basically a low-key red, a high-key black, or basically they're saying that they are supporting the CCP in very low-key ways in order to instill ways of so-called demonizing the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, it showed what happened when the national security law got into unguided rails, and basically the idea of patriotic education also got into unguided rails, and with basically no check and balance, these things or these events would basically continue, or basically just repeat itself again and again, just to try and to just technically to lose citizens' faith on the government's ability to govern. Next, this is about Taiwan. So, first of all, 41 Taipei city's village chief had been summoned by prosecutors for national security allegations. So, idea for village first. So, village is the fourth level administrative division in Taiwan, where the term village is used regardless of whether the area is built up or not, which in Taipei city's sense will be similar to the size of a community that comprised of approximately 10,000 people. The village chiefs in Taipei were summoned for their tours or their actions of leaving Taiwan and going to China. Tours to China allegedly funded by the United Front departments by the Chinese Communist Party. While in here, most of the village chiefs are actually not prosecuted or charged with anything related to national security after they have been summoned by the prosecutors. However, some of them got charged. While at the same time, there are also some other village chiefs from other cities and counties in Taiwan, for example in Keelung, being summoned for the questioning of similar events, while with approximately 70 people, including 41 in Taipei City, were summoned in total. For those who were charged, the prosecution mentioned their participation in activities and tours funded by the United Front departments in China, with the aim to encourage them to vote for and support specific candidates, which they consider friendly to China. A majority of such village chiefs or community elected officials who got summoned to questioning are technically, most of them, not all, were basically have a higher portion of them are actually Chinese Kuomintang village chiefs, while most of them while the remaining people are mostly independents. And here, it seems that Taiwan is stepping up its efforts to secure election security, where people will be able to choose their future leaders in 30 days' time, or the next president and the next legislative yuan's council member or legislative council member of the legislative yuan in 30 minutes' time, with basically with all the updates of the election. Basically, they're now getting to the straight road, but just before the finishing line of the election. This showed how the Taiwan's government or Taiwan's prosecutors are trying to erase influence from China for all their actions, or for all their attempts to throw Taiwan's election and to turn it into a more or at least slightly more pro-China. At the same time, this is a news about or a topic about the Taiwan's military. So a helicopter pilot was arrested for national security charges for its attempted flee or its attempted betrayal of the Taiwan's defense forces. This was related to a plan of the helicopter pilot driving a Chinook helicopter, CH-47, to fly from Taiwan, albeit outside of the Taiwan Strait middle line, and land in China, as China is seeking to boost its helicopter lifting technologies by trying to reverse engineering the Chinook 47 for fulfilling China's domestic demand for possible military actions, for example, an invasion of Taiwan for its dream of grand unification. Basically, as in quite a few updates prior, or as in an update that will be discussed next, basically all of these will be attempts and issues related to Taiwan's own military in boosting their own deterrence forces, while at the same time deterring China from invading the country or invading the independent state or region or whatever territory and etc. So now a bit more interesting news, but less related to national security, but it's related to security at least, while at most is related to how Taiwan is designing a people-centered transport system. So as discussed in quite a few episodes prior, the idea of pedestrians or the right of way for pedestrians has basically been a hot topic since August. However, in December, a junior high school student created a painting related to related to how some pedestrians are abusing the discussion of Taiwan's car-based mobility system, or its transition from a car-based mobility system to a pedestrian-based mobility system, by portraying pedestrians as emperors who are deliberately occupying the crosswalk from vehicular access. This was a reference to how pedestrians will get an absolute priority in the right of way when they are in sidewalks and crosswalks, which happened in an amendment or in a law amendment in Taiwan. That were not passed, but were advocated by all major party candidates. It stirred up controversies as the painting, if without any description, portrayed an idea where pedestrians are bad in nature. However, upon reviewing the description, it seems to say about how things, when got into extreme cases, or for example, protection against pedestrians, can be done in a way or can be abused in a way that affects the fundamental rights or basically rights that people are not taken for granted, but people consider that as basically common sense. For example, in this case, in Taiwan's case, the junior high school student would not be able, or the not the junior high school student, but the pedestrian, as they have absolute right of way, will be able to technically block all traffic just by the person standing on the pavement, as this ban or as this restriction extends, from, for example, if there is a citizen on the pavement, then the whole pavement should be free of cars, even if cars are coming in the direction where, or in the opposite direction, or in the direction opposite of where or how the pedestrian is walking. This stirred up a big controversies, but at last it seems like it was basically due to a lack of description, or a deliberate lack of description when other key opinion leaders discuss this issue. As the description stated that to say, as what I've said, when things got into the extreme, it can turn into some very bad results. This caused a huge backlash to the key opinion leader, as basically this omission of context is basically the key or the idea of support, and basically portraying two different ideas. So this is less connected to national security, but is actually connected to a people-based culture, or a people-centered transportation system, which they consider that as national security, as the birth rate has been decreasing steadily in both regions, but actually has been discussed for a very long time in Taiwan. So lastly, this will be about both Hong Kong and Taiwan. So the first piece of news is about Hong Kong's attempt to follow Taiwan's footsteps in setting up night markets. The night market in Hong Kong is set at Temple Street and opens daily from 6 p.m. to 10 or 11 p.m., depending on date and time, which, according to the government and the Tourism Bureau, and stalls in the or the ownership or the community organization for the Temple Street Market, will work or trying to portray how Shilin Market or the Shilin Night Market in Taipei works. In Hong Kong's night market, it offers a variety of food items, including Turkish kebabs, Taiwanese-style dice-sized beef, freshly squeezed juice and other drinks, boba tea, among others, and even games and etc., which I cannot say is a direct copy, but it actually resembles quite heavily on the Shilin night market. In fact, the high resemblance of Taiwan's street market culture in the Temple Street have been openly admitted by the mutual organization within the Temple Streets for the stores owners of the Temple Streets, as the organizers would like to copy Taiwan's success to the Temple Street's night market quote. This is quite interesting, as the government had been trying to remove any night stores being set elsewhere, since the early 2000s, where they tried promoting Hong Kong as the Asia's world city by launching different campaigns and launching advertisements and even other things. Now, as Hong Kong is becoming further and further away from the vision day by day, the need is now to set up night stores to promote local tourism or sell things that they despise or they are trying to remove and to so-called root out to promote local tourism. This showed how the staggering economy or the stagnating economy has taken toll on not only the tourism industry, but also the general economy or the general development within the city as a whole. A bit outside of the box, in recent days, the host William have been personally seeing videos or reels in Facebook that portrays very cheap street food in China, which is an unusual sense, which is actually quite unusual, as this showed not only how cheap things in China can be, but is technically an issue or a precondition for stagnation, and even in some worst cases, not inflation, but deflation, when deflation happens. This is actually a quite worrying case for myself, or a quite worrying alarm for me, as not only stores in China would need to do so, but now stores in Hong Kong will need to follow suit. This seems unrelated to national security at first, but actually it is, as in the idea of national security in Hong Kong actually considers economic security as the national security. So yes, this is related to national security. So lastly, this is the last piece of topic or the news that is both related to Hong Kong and Taiwan, is related to the National Defense Authorization Act for the 2024 fiscal year. This act is an act that authorizes defense spending in the United States, where it provided a whopping $883.7 billion in the act for the national defense of the United States. It included provisions of over $300 million to support Ukraine. However, this is actually what most people in the Western society would need to see, as the National Defense Authorization Act actually bundled provisions related or related separately to both Hong Kong and Taiwan, and this actually may affect how the Hong Kong itself and Taiwan, the state of or the region in Taiwan and Kinmen and etc. itself are viewed externally. So first is about Taiwan. The NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act for 2024 fiscal year, actually requested that U.S. Defense Secretary to establish a comprehensive training, advising, and institutional capacity building program for the military forces of Taiwan that is consistent with the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act, which is basically to support the modernization of Taiwan's army which tried to drift itself from the old Soviet influence style or the German influence style, which actually happened in the 1930s when China was technically friendly with Nazi Germany. This comes as a response to the congressional research which stated how how Taiwan had been facing threats from China. In fact, it seems that most of the eyes have been looking into this act, or the idea of Ukraine and Taiwan and Israel. However, it also included some interesting provisions in Hong Kong as well. Hong Kong is actually included in the provision of the act by stating that the People's Republic of China, including quote Hong Kong SAR quote and the Macau SAR, should be considered as a foreign adversary of the United States, which actually would enable the Secretary of Defense and, in extension, even the government or president to exercise power to further implement other export control and or sanctions or export control for the goods used or exported from or used technologies from America, and sanctions to individuals in basically they have done quite a lot of times already in Hong Kong. This actually comes as a response to the congressional research which stated how China, under the leadership of the CCP, had been eroding Hong Kong's autonomy since 2020, which was technically guaranteed by the joint declaration between China and the United Kingdom, which was signed in 1984. This seems to be directly targeting the eroding autonomy within the city since the transfer of sovereignty in 1997, with such erosion accelerated since the introduction of the National Security Law in 2020. It showed that basically how different regions are implementing the idea of national security as a whole. In this case, it is the United States version of enforcing national security, where basically they are just restricting their ability to do business with other individuals whom they consider adversaries, and supporting like-minded countries for the defense of their own democracy. So basically, this is what this episode are all about. National security. We have eyewitnessed how the idea of national security has been implemented across various countries. In Hong Kong, it seems, in most cases, concluded by foreign experts as a means of oppression. In Taiwan, it's a mix of technically oppression, as dubbed by the opposition, and real concrete threats. For example, the idea of issuing bounties to Taiwan or issuing or attracting Taiwan's military individuals to deflect from Taiwan and join the PRC. In the United States, it seems to bolster its own national defense and providing support to like-minded countries. So possibly, if things turn for different in Hong Kong, US, and Taiwan and reverse, possibly it may have some interesting developments. However, as of all, basically, this is the end of the episode. So we hope you'll find this episode informative, albeit quite long in terms of the links and the content. If you do, please subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss a single episode. If you have any feedback, please let us know in the comments or drop us an email at william@dragonianpod.com. Thanks again for listening. We will be back next week with more news from Hong Kong and Taiwan. And thanks all for your support for 20 episodes of the Dragonian Podcast. Thanks everyone. Have a safe, prosperous, and happy week ahead. Goodbye.